So, hello everybody. I'm Dana Theus, Theus if you're in Europe. Both are fine. It was a European name originally. I am a leader. I'm not like many of you. I'm a leadership consultant. I work with corporate executive teams and leadership teams and help them work better together. So one of the slides earlier said how like communication and teamwork was the big problem in science, right? Well, guess what? It's a big problem everywhere because everywhere is human. Humans have problems with teamwork and collaboration and communication. So that's kind of my core business. Oop, I did it again. But my private practice as an executive coach, and by the way, so I'm an executive coach with executives, for executives, not, when you said we're talking, you and I were talking, I finally put it together, executive function coaching versus executive coaching. But I will say there's a similarity. Anyway, but my private practice as a coach, as an executive coach, is with women. And I work with women kind of from director level above, so director, vice president, C-suite, and CEO. And I've been doing coaching. I come out of a business career in marketing, but I've been doing coaching for probably 10 years, almost exclusively with women, except in the corporate context. And I've picked up themes. And many of the themes will not be surprising to you, both as women and as mental health professionals. Because what I've noticed, one of the big themes that I've noticed that I want to talk to you all about is that women have a weird and strange relationship with power. Now, I see power through the lens of business, which is all about power, right? It's about money and it's about making things happen in the world. And what I notice is everybody has a weird relationship with power if you think about it, because the story of human history is trauma, right? It's trauma with power. It's dysfunctional power. But in the gender lens of the trauma of human history and power, the women don't usually make out very good through any portion of history, at least before hunter-gatherer, right? So what I've noticed is that women have this strange relationship with power, and they struggle to get external power. Now, I make a distinction between two kinds of power, external power and internal power. Most of you are fairly aware of internal power, and we're pretty aware of external power, because external power is all about the power over things, money, people, time, resources. You know, that ship that just ran into the bridge, that was an act of power, that ship running into a bridge. It was a physical thing in the outside world that we know killed, several people, and we were lucky it didn't kill a whole lot more. So those are external things, and a lot of people want external power. And we look at the statistics of women and external power, and they haven't looked good historically. Right now, there's about 9 or 10% of the Fortune 500 that are CEOs that are women. Back when I started coaching, it was only 4 or 5%. So actually, we're making progress, right? But considering we represent 50% of the population, we got a long way to go. So there's this sense of external power that women are alienated from if you look at the statistics in our society. Well, what I've noticed is that external break with our idea of power, the idea that we can be connected to external power, has kind of broken us from our internal connection with our own power, right? So we were talking about generational trauma just a minute ago, right? Think about the generations of women who've had a broken relationship with their sense of power in the world. And what I notice is that broken relationship with internal power is the key. Because when women start to connect their relationship with power internally, it's amazing how they become accessible to the idea that they could have external power. And as soon as they're accessible to the idea of it, it can happen, and it does happen. So what I want to do in this presentation is kind of give you the story of 4 women, all of whom have experienced various kinds of trauma, almost all in childhood, not surprising. And looking through their lenses, what I've learned about connecting women to their source of internal power, and that I pass on to them, and that has worked for them. In some ways, I hope what I'm doing is giving vocabulary and narrative to some of the professional things that you all are talking about, because I'm sitting back there going, yes, I recognize that. I just don't speak of it in the same terminology. Whoops, I just noticed, for speakers, you will trip if you run into this thing. So I want to talk first about Cindy. Now, I met Cindy like 15 years ago, so it was a long. Things have changed. A lot has changed in our world since the story I'm going to tell you about Cindy. But she taught me a really important story about ambition and women's understanding of ambition and desire to get ahead, desire to be on top. And like I said, we don't look around and see a lot of CEOs of big companies who are women, right? And when I first started coaching with women, I was kind of like, why is that? Women are great. And I started finding research about how powerful leaders, what good leaders women were. I'm like, why aren't we running more organizations? And there's a lot of reasons for that are, we know through history. There is a boys' club, and it does screen women out. It also screens most people of color out, right? It's like, if you don't look and act like the ducks that walk on top, you don't get to the top. So I knew all that story. But what Cindy showed me was there was another story that was more insidious for women. And that was, she was the number 2 in a very large and growing, or not, hers wasn't growing, she was a government organization, but a large and powerful government organization. She had the trust of her boss. If you wanted anything done there, you went to Cindy. Cindy's boss was going to retire, and I'm like, that's great. Cindy's going to become the number 1. She's going to be one of these people at the top, where they're going to be she's going to have the big title. So I went to Cindy and I go, so you're going to apply for the job, right? She's like, no, I wouldn't take that job in a million years. And I was thinking, what? We're about to lose a statistic, right? We have a chance to get a woman at the top of this organization. She doesn't want it. And I wanted to understand why. So I was talking to her and I was like, why don't you want it? Well, she had a story in her head, speaking of the power of narrative, about the game being rigged. She didn't think she could get the job, and she thought if she got the job, they would take her down. And she thought she had more power where she was than she would if she went for the job. So she didn't go for the job, and I was disappointed on one hand, but I didn't want her to be hurting, so I was supportive in that way. Well, it's interesting. She got a job. She got a boss who was not supportive of her, and the final years of her career were miserable because he was basically a narcissistic jerk, right? And so I kind of sit back and I look at this and I say, so did we miss an opportunity with Cindy to get a woman at the top? And did she miss an opportunity to run a really good organization? And the thing is, we will never know because she didn't go for it, right? And what I learned from Cindy was that women are not afraid of power. They're afraid of the price of getting power and of wielding power, because powerful women, people try to take them down. And so you can't just be resilient. I mean, we need to be resilient. It's not enough. You got to be ready to have people take you down. And not all of us are, nor should we have to be. And it's okay if we choose not to do that. But until I met Cindy, I didn't understand how visceral that was for a lot of people, and how much fear women in particular have when it comes to thinking about having the risk and exposure of being at the top, right? Because there's a lot of risk and exposure. It's reasonable to be afraid of that. It is reasonable to be afraid of that. But the fear is what holds us back. Now, oh, here I go pointing at the wrong place again. There we go. That's me. My story was different. I won't bore you with all of it. But what I learned from my story, this piece of it, this was mid-career for me. I hit the glass ceiling. I applied for a vice president position. I didn't get it. I was told I was never going to get it in that organization. And frankly, looking back on it, that wasn't wrong. I wasn't really ready for it. But I didn't have a good mentor. I didn't have anybody helping me understand what would it take to get to that level that realistically. And that lack of mentorship was too bad. But what I learned in that situation is I decided, okay, if I'm not going to get there in this job, I don't want to be in corporate America. These guys are all jerks. I quit. So I quit. And I opted off the corporate ladder at that point. I opted out of the search for power. And I got to tell you, it taught me the biggest lesson of my life. They hired me back as a contractor to work 2/3 as much for 3/4 the salary. I'm like, this is a win. And opting out was an act of power for me. I got off the corporate ladder, so I did opt out in that sense. But it was an act of power, and it taught me a lot about the ability to just say, I don't put up with this anymore. and not act out of fear. So maybe I learned something from Cindy, right? I refused to act out of fear, but I still opted out. Now later I did get another vice president position somewhere else, so it wasn't permanent. But what I learned in that moment is that I had to stop waiting for permission to somebody to give me the promotion or give me the self-love. We were talking about that earlier, right? Someone else to give it to me. I had to just stop waiting for permission and make a choice, not out of fear. And when I did, the rest of my life changed, and it continues to change. So in that sense, what I learned is any choice is an act of power, right? Any choice. And sometimes the biggest, riskiest ones are the most important acts of power. One more story, and I'll bring some of the themes together here. So this is Kimberly. Kimberly comes from a lot of trauma in her background, which I will not disclose. But she, to me, is sort of a hero in my story. She's been a client now for about 5 years, all through COVID and all that. She actually has external power. She's a CEO of an organization. And she's the breadwinner in her family. So at home and at work, she is in the power position, right? But when I met her, she's what I call the exceptional woman who is exhausted. Because she is exceptional. And she has grown her business. And she has, funded her family. And it's all been great. But she holds herself to a standard of perfection that is so unrealistic that she can't, even she, who is exceptional, cannot meet this standard of perfection. And it's never enough. Anything that goes wrong is her fault. Anything that goes right, she won't take credit for. Somebody else mentioned that earlier, right? And she was so exhausted when I was working with her and I was giving her mindfulness and other kinds of, techniques that helped her a lot. And she was like, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And I said, okay, great. Hey, I opted out once. Let's talk about what happens if you want to opt out. And she starts talking, and I go, what turns you on? What do you want to do? What do you love to get up in the morning to do? We talked about purpose and meaning in life, right? She described her job. And I was like, Kimberly, wait a minute. Listen to yourself. You just described your job. Why do you want to quit your job? And then she goes through all this again. Well, it's never enough. And I go, you realize that's not your job, that's you. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about changing you back to the internal, right? And we worked together for another year. She was making progress, and she finally woke up one day and she goes, I get it. It's enough. No, I am not doing this anymore, right? And we unpacked a little bit, and the part of the realization she had was, her business partner, who was a man, and her husband were both taking advantage of her exceptional effort. They were riding her coattails, and she finally saw it, right? And she finally realized that she had been acting out of fear. She had been holding herself back. And I said to her, I was like, well, what lights you up again? Let's go back to that conversation we had. And she goes, I'm not sure I know, because I've always been following their vision. My husband and my business partner. I've been following their vision of what I should do with all my effort. I said, well, what's your vision? She had to go think about that for a few months. She finally came up with one. 2 years later, she and her business partner are renegotiating their business, and she's buying him out, and she's divorced. And happier for it, because she's out of an abusive relationship. So what I learned from Kimberly was that no one knows what lights you up. No one knows your vision, your dream, like you do. Even they don't know it, even if they think they do, right? Because it is the power in us, this idea of purpose, this idea of vision. And when I saw Kimberly tap into that, I saw her just start moving all these obstacles away that had defined her entire life. Why? Because that was important enough to her to change the narrative in her head. She started actually saying no to things because saying yes to that was so important. And that taught me a really important lesson in boundary setting, that setting boundaries arbitrarily has no power. Setting boundaries so that you can achieve what is meaningful to you has all the power in the world. And the other thing Kimberly taught me is perfection is not the enemy of good. You know, we say enemy or perfect is the enemy of good. No, perfect is the enemy of growth. Because when you're trying to be perfect, you're not tolerating the lessons you're learning. You're trying to stay between the failures, right? Keep me away from failure. Growth comes from brushing into failure, taking risks that don't work, taking risks that do work, and figuring out why, right? So the perfection thing that women fall into is really insidious, and we often don't really fully appreciate that. Let me just say this. So here are 3 themes that I take away from these stories that are kind of it's the consolidation of what I use with my clients in my vocabulary, which is you got to stop waiting for permission from the outside world to help you know what to do next. Make a choice and act. Learn from it, go back and make another choice. That's all it is. Choose, act, reflect, choose, act, reflect, right? I think anybody who's worked with anybody in a clinical or coaching or therapeutic setting recognizes that. And so many people don't reflect, and they don't realize what they're choosing. They don't realize what actions they're taking. And getting them to slow down and see that and to stop not making a choice because of their fear is huge. Not acting from fear, which is not the same as not being afraid, which everyone in this room knows, right? You can be afraid. You can have your feelings. You can have your fear. Don't let it power your choice. There's a problem. What should power your choice? Excitement, joy, desire. So many people are disconnected from that, especially so many women, right? They don't know what else to act from. So of course fear, which is very powerful, tends to drive their behaviors. So slowing people down to get in touch with what they desire, what they find joy in, what they find exciting, that's half the battle. Once they connect to that, the rest of it becomes, relatively speaking, easier. And finally, that sense of perfection just has to go away. And for any of us who have daughters, I don't have sons, unfortunately, or fortunately, I have great daughters-in-law. We have to get rid of that sense of perfection. We just have to, because it's killing every woman on the planet, as far as I know. And that sense of perfection, that there is such a thing, it just has to go away. What replaces it? Meaning and purpose. If it's so important to me to accomplish this thing in the outside world, I will allow myself not to be perfect. Now, I will say one thing. When it comes to women, so many of us define ourselves by the health and wellness of other people. That is a good thing. It is not the same as what always lights you up. So for those of us who work with women, listen for that. Because they'll say, oh, well, I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for my mother. I'm doing this for... That's nice. I'm glad you care about them that much. Does it get you out of bed every day? Does it make you want to fail so you can figure out how to get to it and get it fixed? Almost invariably, the answer is no. So listen for that, because you've got to connect to a vision of doing something important in the world. And if it is making others' lives better, that's fine. But make sure it gets you out of bed every day, because it's not, those two are often not the same thing. Oops, I went backwards. Okay, finally, I want to bring some of these themes together in the story of Jasmine. Jasmine, when I met her, she was essentially the COO. She didn't have that title, but she's the chief operating officer of an organization that serves mentally challenged college students. And she had built the business. There was this guy who had an idea, and he hired Jasmine, and Jasmine made it work and built the business, and now she had built 3 other sites. And so she had a very senior position. She had external power in that company. But she never got invited to the table to talk about the business about where the business was going to go and how it was going to grow. And this was frustrating to her. And I started talking to her. I'm like, well, tell me why aren't you at the table? And she goes, well, actually, I'm too busy to be at the table, right? Because I'm doing all the work. The guys go off, they have these big ideas, they make these big commitments, and then they say, Jasmine, clean it up. Make it happen, right? Well, I see the heads nodding, right? a lot of the time, women step in and are very happy to clean up the mess because we're good at that and we can get that done. Unfortunately, we don't have time. If we're so busy cleaning up the mess, we don't have time to run up and make sure they don't make the mess because we're too busy cleaning the mess, right? And this was kind of a cycle for Jasmine, and trying to undo her mental story. What was the narrative in her head that was kind of perpetuating this? It all had to do with her value being the doer. She did things. She had a long list to get through, and she got through it every day, and she made it happen, and she never let a ball drop, right? Some of that perfection again, some of that perfection standard in her head. She never let a ball drop. I said, what happens if you drop a ball? She goes, my life is over. It's all terrible if I drop a ball. And I said, well, what's more important, sitting at the table to be part of the business strategy or making sure no ball drops? She goes, well, I've been acting like it's no ball drops. And I said, yeah, but what's really important to you? What's your vision? What gets you out of bed in the morning? And she goes, what gets me out of bed in the morning is imagining this company running really well and serving many, many, many more students. So here was a way to get that connection to helping other people's lives, connected to a vision of the business that could serve more of those people, right? And once she connected to that, I said, well, what if that was your primary focus? What would you be doing differently? She goes, I'd be letting some balls drop. And I'd be letting some pain be felt by somebody else so that we could get some resources in here to fix it that wasn't me. Well, 2 years later, she's president of that company. They literally realized they cannot function without her, not because she did all the things, but because of who she is, what she knows, her ability to make strategic prioritization decisions. But Jasmine had to step up and realize that was her true value. She had to let go of this narrative in her head that her value is how much she could get done in a day, because none of us scale, right? We don't scale past 24 hours. We really don't scale to 24 hours, but many of us live in a different reality. And what I learned from Jasmine was how important it was to let some balls drop. So you got to let some balls drop, right? So just to bring that home, I want to give you all 3 tips. Whoops, see, I did it. Did I unplug me? I unplugged something. I want to give you 3 tips that I give my executive coaching clients, and I think they're kind of normal vernacular for some of the work that some of you all do. One is the silence trick, okay? We all have narratives in our head that are powerless, and we have narratives in our head that are powerful, right? And the powerless ones make us feel safe, because then we pull back and we don't risk and expose ourselves. But if you want to appear powerful in the outside world, try this trick. Just don't voice anything but powerful narratives. You can think them. You can feel them. They can be real to you. Don't say them. Here's an example. I'm not the expert, but I think we ought to do an audit on that, right? Yeah. Okay. Just think it. I'm not the expert. I think we ought to do an audit on that. Totally different external reality that has people reacting to you differently, right? And that's the point. And I guarantee you, if you force yourself for a week not to voice any powerless narrative about yourself in particular or anything, you won't think it as much anymore. You don't need to. You see how the world lets you be powerful, and you can let that in, and you do have to let it in. But a week of it, I swear to God, your life will change. Just don't give voice to powerless narratives. The second one is shift to positive energy. So every terrible thing in the world has negative energy, and it's all true, right? And it all has a positive mirror. And when it comes to our self-narratives, this is critical, right? It's everything we're about. So here's a simple one. I'm not blank enough. Can everybody fill in the blank? Yeah. Mine is, I'm not educated enough. Why? Because everybody in this room has more letters behind their name than me. And that is a true statement. So I want you to write down for yourself, what are you not enough of? Be specific. Write down, I'm not blank enough. Go ahead and write it down. It has to be true in your mind. I'm not blank enough. There is another truth right next to that is also true and positive. And I am blank enough. For me, I'm not educated enough, but I am experienced enough. Okay, so write down the positive now. The equally true or more true thing. They can both be true. They both should be true. In the writing down of the positive thing, your energy will shift, and that's where you want to stay. So whenever I find myself feeling not enough, I go, what am I not enough of? And what am I enough of? I stay in the positive that I am enough of. And in the shifting of the energy and the staying in the energy, I'm in a more powerful orientation. And the last thing, because I know I'm out of time, is figure out what gets you out of bed every morning, excited to fail. Because through that failure will come your success. And then say no to everything except the things that will help you succeed on what you care about most. That's called prioritization. Okay? You must prioritize. But you don't prioritize randomly. You prioritize against what matters most. And when you run your life that way, you became a very powerful person in the world and a very powerful person to everyone who benefits from what you do. With that, I'm done. I'm what? A minute over maybe?